table obscurity is turning out to be a lot more heart-stopping than I remember. A tense, battling defeat at home to the league leaders, followed by a dramatic point-snatching venture up north, has the Royals pretty much where we left them. Welcome to episode 144 of the Tilehurst End podcast, and thank you to everyone who continues to listen and continues to get involved in our Patreon campaign. It is, as the old host Dan Wimbush would say, our virtual tip jar. When I come up with a better phrase than that, I'll stop nicking his phrases, I'll stop nicking his structure for the show, but in the meantime, we'll crack on with episode 144. And speaking of the old and the new, I am joined, as an absolute privilege, by the new editor of the whole website itself, the tilehurstend.com, Simeon Pickup, aka Bucks Royal. How's it going, Sim?
I'm very well, how are you?
You know what, I'm not too bad. We're recording this just on Tuesday night, straight after the Bolton result, so it's a 2-2 draw for Reading. If anyone switched off at half-time, I don't entirely blame you, but the Royals have scraped a point, and of course they lost 2-0 on the weekend to Wolves, so we'll dig straight into those with the recap, which is coming up right now.
The Tilehurst End podcast.
By Reading fans, for Reading fans.
So, Wolves at home, going into it, I just felt, Sim, that this was a performance over a result sort of game. That's kind of what happened, actually. Is this 2-0 defeat something that you were overly worried by? Were there enough positives against a good team like Wolves for it to just be okay enough to have had a hard-fought 2-0 defeat here?
Yeah, I think you have to accept defeat in a game like this, to be honest. Wolves are a very good side. They've got a lot of money to throw at player recruitment, and they've got a lot of talent, a lot of quality, and that shone through on the day. Despite how good we were, we created a lot of chances. We dominated the ball as we always do. I still feel that we're always going to be up against it, and we're always going to struggle to score or get anything out of the game. So with all of that in mind, I'm not too worried about the result.
Well, one of the things that we've been talking about recently in terms of our approach to these games is Stam's formation. It seemed like he'd sort of settled into a team for a little bit, and then the Wolves game, he goes back to 5 at the back, and Thiago Aloy was subbed on quite early. I suppose it was a tactical change in a way. Was this a concerning thing for you that we seemed to had a nailed down team that was performing well, and then he's changed it again? Is that a sign that Stam hadn't really learned anything from the past few weeks?
I think it's a sign that he's certainly learned stuff in the last few weeks before the international break. It was good to see him stick to a back 4 against Nottingham Forest and then away at Derby, and certainly at Derby it was a good, straightforward team selection. It made a lot of sense, and because of that we managed to get the win. With regards to the Wolves game, I felt that he just didn't have enough confidence in what he'd already done, and he just felt that he had to make a change to try and counter their vast attacking quality by bringing in that extra centre half when he didn't really need to. I don't think it's that he hasn't really learned anything, it's just when he has learned anything, he doesn't stick by it. He doesn't have the confidence to just keep things going and try and get some form for the players that he's keeping in the side. And I think you can certainly see that with Omar Richards, who had a very good game up at Derby and then was very unlucky to be dropped for the Wolves game in place of, I think it was Chris Gunter at left back. So for me it just shows that Jaap Stam is capable of coming up with some really good tactical ideas, as shown against Forest and Derby, but he needs to stick with them.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned Omar Richards. He's a player who, as you say, did very well at Derby, and I'm kind of worrying, are we having a Tariq Fosu moment here with Omar Richards? Because he did incredibly well at Derby, then dropped for Gunter for the Wolves game, and then he didn't play against Bolton either. He was on the bench as Tyler Blackett got a run at left back. So, we'll perhaps have to keep a lid on Omar Richards and the enjoyment that we had from his performance at Derby, and sort of move on and let things simmer, because I definitely think Stam is trying to take the spotlight away from him, and we'll get on to his particular personal situation in News Bites. As I think you said about the attacking performance there from Wolves, it really was clinical finishing that I felt changed the game in this. There's an excellent Wolves first goal. I know we're a little bit open, but it was well taken. The second goal, I think, is just a case of it being a late situation where they don't score that goal unless they've scored the first. And, we had our chances. Jonathan Swift hit the post. Mo Barrow had a point-blank shot saved by John Ruddy. It was just that luck, wasn't it? Do you just feel that, Cardiff, let's look at them. They had Brentford in on the weekend, and Morpay, the striker, just missed an absolute sitter. We don't get that kind of luck at the moment, do we?
Yeah, I think from Wolves' point of view, when they have such a quality side, then they're able to make their own luck. And sure, they have a very good opening goal from Cavallero. It's a really well-taken finish and some really good build-up play as well. But for a lot of the game, they're able to rely on a very good goalkeeper in John Ruddy, who was been talked about as a England international at one point a few years ago. And then also having a very good defence in front of him and being able to grab another goal on the against a run of play at the other end at the end of the match. Those are the kind of things that happen when you've got a really good side, and you're able to get on the right side of those fine margins that there are in football. You go back a couple of years to say when we won the league under Brian McDermott, games like Brighton away when we were very poor.
Yeah, very much so.
But we were able to score a really good goal through Ian Hart, through that free kick, and then ride our luck through the rest of the game. And it's just confidence, it's the belief that even though you're playing below your best, you're still able to go out there and not just hold on to a draw, but go out there and get the win.
Yeah, certainly what Wolves had on Saturday. Moving forward then to tonight's game, or Tuesday night's game, as you're listening to this, that grit and determination, as I suppose we were just talking about in terms of the Wolves' performance, for us to just make that extra little yard, it certainly wasn't there in the first half, was it? What do you think just went wrong? We had 2 goals. I think they're both from set pieces, just floated in. One's a flick on for Burke to score early on for Bolton. Then Darren Pratley, I think it's not the first time he scored against us, pops up with the second. Did we just switch off? Did we just not turn up? What's your take on what happened in the first half on Tuesday night?
To be honest, I was always worried going into this game because we tend to struggle going away to sides that we really should win. I think back to games like Nottingham Forest away last season and Millwall away this season, when the teams that we're playing aren't technically very gifted, but they've got managers who are going to really motivate them, get them organised and make them hard to beat. And they're going to try and get goals from set pieces. They're going to really play a gritty, dogged kind of game, and we're not able to compete with them in that style of football, to be honest. Again, if you compare it to the Brian McDermott side, even when we weren't playing very well, we still knew how to defend set pieces. We still knew how to do all the basics so that we could get a result even when we weren't playing particularly well. But now, under Jaap Stam, despite all the problems we've had with defending, with not being able to beat teams that we should do, there's not been a huge amount of progress. And that's the frustrating thing. And the thing is about this Bolton game, particularly the first half, we've seen it so many times before, when we shouldn't be playing that badly, to be honest. And I don't really know how to sum it up, to be honest.
Well, I think the stats can do a lot of talking, certainly. It's a case of deja vu. So often when we have 75% possession, our pass completion rate is miles ahead of Bolton's. One of every 2 passes was going astray for the home team. I do think, though, the use of the ball is shown in one stat in particular, where we made 12 tackles to their 8. Now, if you think about that for a second, that shows we did get involved in terms of how many times they got the ball into the box, and we did make the tackles and we did pressurise them. But they, with 8 tackles from our 75% possession, they had no interest whatsoever in taking the ball off of us. And I think that confuses Reading to an extent. When we play teams that come at us, we do kind of know what we're doing. Obviously, having a lead like we did at Derby, that helps a lot. But when you're 2 goals down and you don't have any sort of pressure on you to create when you're so far back, I just think that this team just gets a little bit confused and doesn't really know what to do. And as it was a Liam Moore goal that got us back into the game. Liam Moore, a player that's certainly been in the news, which we'll get onto a bit later, but he's turning into quite the goal machine, isn't he now?
Yeah, I think he's our joint top scorer now with 3 goals, the same as Modu Barrow this season, and that's a real positive point for us at the moment, because in the last couple of seasons we haven't necessarily had that centre half who's going to pop up and score goals in those tight games, and Liam Moore's proving that he can do that at the moment, whether it's finishing with either his feet or with a headed goal. He's an asset at both ends of the pitch, and that's vital for us.
Yeah, I think one player who has been vital for us in the last few weeks, Jonathan Swift, came off injured in the first half, just before the first goal, actually. Liam Kelly came back on. You haven't seen him for a while. Would you like Swift and Kelly to be playing together, or as long as one is there, are you kind of satisfied that the other 2 central midfielders can be more intent on defending, and that sort of adds balance to the team?
I think the key thing for us at the moment is just having a balanced midfield 3. And what I had been really impressed with in the Forest and Derby games is that having people like Bakuna and Edwards in that midfield 3 really gives you energy and composure, and it allows someone like Jonathan Swift to get forward and play those key passes, get a goal, have a shot, try and play someone else in. I'm not so sure if having Liam Kelly in alongside Jonathan Swift is the right thing, to be honest, because it's a bit of a top-heavy midfield. If you've got 2 creative players, then you're having to rely on one defensive player behind them. Perhaps in a home game when we're looking to attack the opposition and really get the shots in and dominate the game. Yeah, exactly. But in the tougher games, particularly away from home, I don't think the balance is quite right. And I was thinking about this a couple of days ago, and for me it really is it's an either-or situation. It's a lot like the Gerrard Lampard debate from a couple of years ago with England. And I suppose the silver lining to the cloud of John Swift's injury is that it does give a chance to Liam Kelly to come in and lay a claim to that creative role in the midfield. Although then again, Pelly Clement might have something to say about that.
Yeah, it was Pelly Clement who came on and replaced John Swift immediately. I mean, I've been a bastion for the 4-2-3-1 on this podcast since my helming of it. And if Clement is going to be that man who sits in behind the striker and creates, he's got that potential about him. I certainly won't be complaining if the results are good. Speaking of which, this, it kind of resets the season in a large sense these past few weeks. We've been good, we've been okay, we've been bad, we've still gotten away with it. But we've hit every end of the spectrum in the last few days. Does this end your playoff hopes for now? Does it change them? Does it up them? Where do you lie in that regard now?
I still think we're potentially good value for a playoff finish, but obviously it's going to take some very good form in the second half of the season. On the whole, it relies on 2 things for me. First of all, Jaap Stam working out the team that he wants to be playing week in, week out. He can't keep on switching between, say, 4-3-3 and 5-2-3 or 3-5-2 or whatever. He can't keep on doing that every game. Perhaps in the odd match when it's really required, but generally speaking, he needs to pick a side and stick with it, work out what the best team is that can go out and beat teams. But also we desperately need to get a striker in January, because Aluko and Kermigan have done decent jobs as centre forwards this season. Aluko for me is a wide forward. He's not someone to play through the middle, but Kermigan on the other hand he's past his best with respect to him. He was excellent last season, but I fear that the injury is taking things out of him.
Well, he didn't even go to Bolton, did he? So is that a sign that he's a once a week kind of man now? Yeah,
very possibly. And whatever the reason it is for him not going up to Bolton, whether it's just a minor injury or something a little bit more major, I think it just shows we can't rely on him week in, week out. It's great as a bonus to have him, say, on the bench, but I wouldn't be relying on him week in, week out. Similarly, John Daddy Bodvarsony's a good striker, but 3 goals last season for Wolves in about 40 appearances just doesn't cut it. And similarly, Danny Loader and Sam Smith, very good talents, but young, unproven talents. So we desperately need that. proven goal scorer in January.
Yeah, perhaps without that, there'll be a lot of fans out there who agree that without a striker, the playoffs just beyond Reading at the moment. Well, we're talking about incomings. We'll be talking about some potential outgoings in just a moment in News Bites.
Reading News Bites
on the Tilehurst End podcast.
So if there was one player, Sim, that you didn't want to sell, and if there was one team that you, or one manager even, that you didn't want to sell him to, I might guess that that is Liam Moore, the team is West Ham, and the manager for a different team, obviously, is Brendan Rodgers.
Yep, sounds about right to me.
And yet, here we stand with, I think it's the Daily Mail came up with it first, that Liam Moore's heading off to Celtic. The Scottish press absolutely loved this idea. They really latched onto it, and have, I think Liam Moore's since told the Chronicle that he's not really focused on any sort of move at the moment, which is as you'd expect. The West Ham interest, Premier League, obviously the type of thing that would be very interesting to him. Does this rumour have legs in your mind?
I think it's one of those just putting one and one together and getting two from the press, to be honest. Impressive centre-half, team in the Premier League that wants to shore up their defence ahead of a relegation fight in the new year. It's hard to prove, it's hard to disprove. I wouldn't be too worried about it. At the moment, Liam Moore seems to be settled in Reading, both in a personal sense and on the pitch as well. So I'm very confident that he'll be staying, although I might have to eat my words in by February. And to be honest, I see him as a future Reading captain. On the whole, his attitude, his qualities on the pitch, his general effect on the squad certainly shows that he'll be a future Reading captain.
Well, he was a future Leicester captain at one point, of course, before that all went a little bit awry for him. We did a poll on the Tilehurst End Twitter just in the last few days asking how much fans think that he's worth. It came back to between £6 to £10 million. A lot of fans are dreaming of over £10 million. Is it, let's say, £8 million is the price. Do you think that we can replace him and get a striker and genuinely improve the team with that sort of money?
That's a tough one, really. If you said that in the summer, about £8 million for a striker, potentially a little bit less, and then go out and get a defender as well, then I probably said yes. But with the figures being quoted for people like Oliveira, Hemed, Hugel as well, I'm worried that even if we did sell Liam Moore for a lot of money, another team might just say, well, you've got a lot of money, then give us 20 million for such and such, whether or not they're worth it.
Yeah, there's that danger that someone is going to do sort of math, say, well, you've got 8 million for Moore and you got 5 million you offered us last week anyway, so that's,
Yeah.
add it all together and that's what we'll accept. A player who's been talked about moving for a lot less money, actually, Omar Richards, as we said earlier, in The Sun, talking about Derby, Bournemouth. I actually read an opinion piece in the week saying that Leeds must sign this man, which is utter words that I'm not allowed to discuss on this podcast. Omar Richards leaving, is that something that you worry about in January?
It's another one of those odd rumours, to be honest. He's only played, 2 league games for us so far, that QPR away game and QPR and Derby away. It's so it's odd to see him linked with Premier League teams just off the back of that. Again, it seems like 1 and 1 plus 2. Well, 1 plus 1 equals 2. My maths is awful this late in the evening. Just impressive Championship youngster linked
young
with
English.
Exactly, yeah. Premier League team that has English manager, wants talent, is prepared to pay money for talent. It's basic stuff. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, the interesting thing that I think is to look on with this Richards rumour is the idea that he's out of contract in the summer. I can't really verify that at the moment. The club are incredibly good at hiding these sort of things and not making it publicly known. Maybe he's got a year extension that the club can just activate, Chris Gunter style. Who knows, really? It's one. I think the only worry that we need to have Omar Richards at the moment is that he gets in the team. One player who has got in the team and made a very good fist of it of late is Leandro Bacuna, who I can announce, as anyone on the website has seen, is our Player of the Month. Some other little news bites to deal with. The FA Youth Cup next round has been announced. It's on December the 18th versus Millwall. That's 7 p.m. at the Madstad for anyone wanting to go and watch the under-18s. And of course, anyone wanting to go down to the Madstad on December 23rd against Bournemouth need only pay £5. That's if you're a Burton fan. That's if you're a Reading fan who hasn't got a season ticket. It's an initiative because it's the 500th game at the Madejski Stadium that the club are doing. We've been pretty glowing of it at the Tilehurst end on the website. I think this is an absolutely fantastic initiative. You'll agree with me, Sim, won't you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Excellent initiative. Great to see the club wanting to get the Madejski full right before Christmas on the 500th game anniversary of the Madejski. I think it's a really good homage to the club's history, and it should hopefully get a lot of fans in of all ages, particularly younger people wanting to come in and join in with the club's history.
Some people aren't so happy with it. It must be said, there were the season ticket holders who kind of, why aren't we getting a refund? I mean, season tickets kind of break down as about £12 per game, so if you want your £5, I don't have too much sympathy because, you're still making every other game is still a massive saving. But do you think this is the type of thing that maybe the club should have thought about and should have predicted, that maybe there'll be some season ticket holders unhappy that other fans are benefiting from such a venture?
Yeah, I can feel a little bit of sympathy with season ticket holders who are a bit annoyed, the ones who will go week in, week out, and they've had a lot to put up with over the last couple of years, to be honest. The rubbish that we saw under Adkins, Clark and McDermott, and this season to an extent as well. So having to put up with all of that, and then it's, I suppose, just for their point of view, seeing a lot of new fans coming in and getting all these bonuses, all these discounts, it's a bit annoying. I don't completely agree with people who are really annoyed about it, but I can have a bit of sympathy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of short on the sympathy front, I'm not going to lie. I think, speaking from personal experience, I think there's a good amount of fans out there who aren't season ticket holders, not necessarily for want of trying, work commitments, money problems, family, etc., etc. There's a vast swathe of people out there who this is just a nice little incentive for them. I think that's quite a bigger fan group that is necessarily paid attention to at the moment, in terms of those who are, as loyal as season ticket holders, have been season ticket holders in the past, will be again in the future, but aren't at the moment. And for me, we're playing Burton. At the end of the day, we're not going to have a bunch of tourists come along who aren't going to know the rules. You're just going to have fans coming along and hopefully making what would otherwise be a pretty, there's a very large chance this is a drab, cold game, and hopefully it'll be something special. So, anyone who has any particular thoughts on that, please get in touch with the club via our email address, to the blog rather, with the email address. We've got the tilehurstend@gmail.com, and the Facebook and Twitter. We're always ready to hear what fans think, and we'll get some of that now as we answer your questions from the mailbag.
Get social with the boys.
Find them on Twitter
at the Tilehurst End
and facebook.com/the Tilehurst End.
So thank you for everyone who's got in touch again this week with a little bit of a limited mailbag to digress into. But from first off, it's the guys from D3D4 who do our Football League reviews. James Richards has got in touch with us saying, "Hi guys, great to see the podcast go from strength to strength. Here is a discussion point that will hopefully be of interest to you. With the January transfer window looming, I have picked out 3 names that would be well worth a look at Reading. £7 million for Luco is all well and good, but there is always a gem available to the discerning shopper at a much more reasonable price. Here are those 3 names. The first one is Marcus Maddison from Peterborough United, a skilled attacking midfielder / forward that would probably set you back about £2 million at most. Billy Bowden is number 2, Bristol Rovers, a goal-scoring winger / forward, has a lot of vision and flair, might be going for under £1 million if we're lucky. Kiefer Moore of Ipswich Town is the third one. He's the top scorer in League One for anyone keeping an eye on those leagues. He's been on loan at Rotherham, as I say, good in the air. Surprisingly good feet as well, James says, for a large striker, and reckons that if Ipswich want him to move on, about £2 million might be enough for that. He says, just a thought from the guys at D3, D4 Football, we won't charge you for your scouts reports, but we will charge you for being Reading fans. Thank you very much, James, for your kind words on the podcast. Sim, your expertise on lower league football is undoubted. Is lower league football the place we should be looking for in January to get a bargain?
I'm not particularly well acquainted with the three names on the list, although I've heard a bit about Kiefer Moore just by reading the D3, D4 reviews, which have been very good for the site. Scoring a lot of goals in League One, and hopefully if we could get him in January, then that would be a good boost for the side. I'm not sure if there's quite as much value in the lower divisions nowadays as there was a couple of years ago. If you go back to, say, when we bought Adam Lafondre, you could get a very good goal-scoring striker from League Two for about 350,000. But just looking at the prices quoted at the moment, looking at maybe up to £2 million for someone who isn't proven beyond the third tier, I'm not sure if that's the kind of player that Reading should be going for at the moment. There's a lot more value out on the continent. If you look at someone like Orlando Sarr, a couple of years ago, okay, he didn't have a stellar record at Reading, but he did have a very good goal scoring record out in Poland, I think it was, and we could bring him in for about £1 million because the value is out there, out on the continent, and that could be what is the most important thing when it comes to bringing players in January.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. I think even if, you say on the continent, we need only look at, the French leagues, the German leagues. There is certainly a lot of interest in players like that. We don't have to go all the way to, Montenegro to find these good gems. Even the lower leagues in the Bundesliga and Ligue 2 have plenty of potential in them. And, we've exploited foreign leagues well in the past. So as for my personal take on the lower leagues, I just sense that they're getting a little bit of trickle down from the Premier League at the moment and starting to demand fees that are just a little bit above their pay grade and a little bit much for players who are, up and coming essentially. If the club think they're good enough, and if they bring them in, I'm sure they'll be worth a punt. But if the club don't see any reason to, I don't blame them too much. Mourinho, not that one, says, given some responses to the £5 tickets for Burton, is there anything the club could do which would make every single supporter happy at the same time? He thinks even promotion or an FA Cup win wouldn't please some. I think we've covered that in our Newsbite segment. Theo asked, do you think against a much weaker side we would have won on Saturday? Because I thought we weren't too bad. Plus, do you think it's because we don't have a clinical enough striker? He thinks that Jan didn't get too many chances, but they fell to the other players. Also, he thinks that we didn't test John Ruddy enough from distance, especially in the first half. He looked very dodgy with John Swift hitting the post. We've sort of covered the clinical striker sense of things. Sim, would you say that Tuesday night's performance against Bolton shows that even against the weaker sides, we've still got work to do?
I think they're very different games, to be honest. As I said about Bolton earlier, it's the kind of team where, technically they're not as good as a side like Wolves, but they're going to make the game very difficult for you in terms of being very physical, being organised, getting men behind the ball. Whereas if you look at a game like Wolves, they're going to be able to go out there, get a very good goal in the first half and ride their luck and then get a second one late on. So in terms of if we would have been able to beat Wolves if they were a weaker side, I think that's probably true actually. Although it's very hard to properly judge a performance like the one we had against Wolves, because there's going to be some people who are going to look at that and say, right, we didn't score any goals at all, so that shows we didn't play very well. And other people are going to be able to come away from it with a lot more positivity, that we created some good chances and we were very close to scoring. It's just I I'm very positive when it comes to how good the Wolves game was. I thought it was a very good performance, particularly a lot better than we had seen in the last couple of months. But then it's just really frustrating to then have a much weaker performance against Bolton and undo a lot of the hard work that we had done in building up momentum in the last couple of games by giving away two pretty straightforward goals in the first half from set pieces.
Yeah, it certainly seems. I mean, we are both myself and Sim are both pretty positive about that Wolves game, but there are plenty of people out there who are quite negative on it. Felt like it was the same old. And in response to that, I would just have to say that it's going to have to be a patience game. If that sort of performance isn't going to satisfy you against a top of the table team, that's absolutely fine to have those standards, but it just means that you'll have to wait a little bit longer for things to get into motion and get up to what you expect out of this football team. Reading Deep says, why does Behrens, who performed better than Barrow against Wolves, get so much flack? Immediately I would say that Behrens doesn't always perform better than Barrow, and that, Behrens, he played down the middle against Derby and did have a good game, but Barrow, fans love the quick, pacey players who run at defenders and seem to make a difference a lot more. And I'd say Barrow, maybe the stats say he doesn't make a difference much more, but he definitely does have those physical aspects that fans love.
Yeah, I think when you're a winger or a wide forward or however you want to put it, if you are seen to be doing something very decisive, very exciting, the fans will forgive you a lot easier if you say have a bad touch and lose the ball or put in a bad cross or something like that. If it's really obvious to the eye that you are going hell for leather to try and create an opportunity, then the fans warm to you. We saw that with people like Jimmy Kebe, as well as another good example, very similar to Modi Barrow. I think Behrens is quite similar to Joby McAnuff in some ways. He's not quite as direct. He's more willing to have some tricky footwork to try and get past the defender. He's not the kind of person who's going to charge straight down the wing and really put the afterburners on and then whip in a cross, which is a bit more frustrating. Well, a lot more frustrating for fans who want to see that direct, exciting football from their wingers. And it's an odd one when you're trying to work out how good Roy Behrens is, to be honest, because a lot of the time he does look frustrating. He doesn't get the ball in, he doesn't have a shot. But then when you look back at his record, 7 goals last season and another 2 already this season, and he's a more reliable source of goals than a lot of other players in the squad. So it's an odd one.
Yeah, we'll have to see how Behrens gets on during the season. After all, the talk of adapting to English football and whatnot, it all counts. At the end of the day, it all adds up for these sort of players. Moving on, we've got Jordan Cottle has asked, is Thiago Laurie actually any good? Spotty record before he joined us, looks elegant some matches and dire in others. For a supposedly ball-playing centre-back, he loses possession more than McShane for me. He came off quite early on against Wolves, didn't he? Same Thiago Laurie. Is his performances this year, I think we'd agree that he played quite well last year, but this year seems to have gone backwards a little bit.
I don't think he's helped by the changes in system, to be honest. He's had some very good performances for us. I think particularly of the Leeds away game when he marshalled their front line very well. Similarly in the playoff semi-finals, I thought he was very good against Fulham. But this season, the changes between a back 4 and a back 3, particularly when he's not playing all the time, he's typically the first one to be dropped out of him, McShane and Moore. He's the one who's in and out of the team, and he's more susceptible to those changes between a back 4 and a back 3. It's very hard for him to get any consistency, any real confidence and form and a proper understanding of how Stan wants him to play. And particularly when you have a reputation as a ball-playing centre-half, I think there's a lot more pressure on you to... a lot more pressure on someone like Ilori to impress the fans. They want to see him charging up the pitch and playing in a striker and all of that. So it's tough for him, to be honest.
I think the comparison to McShane is interesting because McShane strikes me as someone who plays it very safe with the ball because he knows his limitations, whereas Ilori is perhaps someone who doesn't have limitations as such, isn't used to having them, and is trying to be someone who's a bit more adventurous. And I think that ultimately that has an effect, because Ilori, you're talking about a player who's not really played in the Championship, and the Championship isn't it's not a central defender friendly league, is it? It's going to really test you, and that's it's up to Stam at the end of the day. If he feels like he can get the best out of Ilori, him and Brian Teverden were very happy to spend a good amount of cash on him. And if it works, then it works. If it doesn't, then it's, Ilori and the management staff have to have they've got to answer that. We'll move on to the last quick question. Luke Jarrett says he could only watch the highlights of Saturday as he lives in Manchester, but he thought that Reading were unlucky and the signs of improvements were there, especially if, he said this before Tuesday's game, especially if we can get a convincing win against Bolton. It didn't quite happen, but I do feel, as Luke said, getting the win would have been a massive step for moving us on, but the fact that we didn't perhaps just tempers our expectations of this team and just brings us back into line as to what we can honestly expect. And moving on, we have 2 home games to look forward to, so we'll look forward to those now in Any Other Business.
The Tilehurst End Podcast.
Read the blog
on thetilehurstend.com.
Right, well, let's kick off with the prediction league, because there was entertaining news, certainly, in that one of our members on the prediction league table has moved into double figures for points this season. Yes, it is Dan Wimbush, has broken on to 10 points, the only man to predict a draw tonight at the Madejski Stadium. Everyone else thought we were going to win, and congratulations, Dan, who's now got a 1-point lead over Tom Crocker atop the prediction league table. Sim, you're not in it. I mean, you're the guy in charge now. If you want to be in it next season, you can put your foot down and demand it. But going ahead in Sheffield Wednesday, how do you think we're going to do?
I think that's going to be a really tough game for us. They're in a very similar position to us in that they had the playoff finish last season and they've been pretty disappointing this season. Been a lot of Sheffield Wednesday fans calling for Carlos Carvalhal to lose his job because I think they feel that he's just run his course at the club, and Sheffield Wednesday on the whole are in a bit of limbo. I think there's no real proper cohesion about whether they want Carvalhal to stay in the long term or they want someone else to come in, and that sets up an interesting encounter on Saturday. It's going to be cagey. Neither side's going to want to lose it, that's for sure. But I think if Reading take the positives from the last 2 games, and although we've had just the 1 point from the Bolton and Wolves games, there's still a lot of positives to take. There was some very good attacking play against Wolves, creating a lot of good opportunities, and we were unlucky not to score a goal at all. In regards to Bolton, although it was a very poor first half performance in particular, being able to recover in the second and show that grit and determination to get a point when I think a month or 2 ago we wouldn't have done that. So if we can build on that spirit and take it into Sheffield Wednesday, I think we should be good value for a narrow 2-1 win.
I was gonna say 2-1 myself, so it's very fortunate that I picked the same score as the boss. It keeps us nice and happy at the Tilehurst End if we all agree. That's for sure. I agree. The problem with Sheffield Wednesday is that they don't really know where they're coming or going, do they? The problem is when you have a team that's got into the semi-finals or the final of the playoff 2 years running and it doesn't work out. We know as good as anyone that the playoffs are a very draining system to be churned in and out of year on year. That takes its toll on the fans, it takes its toll on the team and the owners and the manager, absolutely everyone. And Sheffield Wednesday 12th at the moment, 24 points. I do think this is a game that Reading have to look to be winning. They're unbeaten in 4, Sheffield, going into their Wednesday night trip to Ipswich, and I just sense that if we're going to continue to kick on and continue to improve, a 2-1 win would do us nicely, after which we have the nice rearranged game against Barnsley. That is surely the type of game that we have to say win only, nothing else counts.
Yeah, that should on paper be a win, but I think then again you can compare it to the Bolton game when a team is going to come to the Madejski. Obviously it's a home game rather than an away fixture, but Barnsley are going to come to the Madejski. They're going to set up with all their players behind the ball. They're going to make it physical. They're going to make it tough for us. They and not going to let us play our game. They're not going to give us opportunities. So it's going to be a very different kind of challenge to, say, the Forest and the Derby games, which we did very well in. But they're both against teams that really like to come out and play football. I'll love it if Barnsley do try and come out and play football, because that'll be very positive for us, I think. But I can't quite see that happening. I think Heckingbottom will set them up in a very hard to beat way, and because of that, to be honest, I worry about that game more than the Sheffield Wednesday game. That said, if Stam can figure things out, if he's not tempted into some bizarre formation change, a 6-1-7 or something, or whatever
that would be bold.
Exactly. Although I wouldn't put it past him, despite the mathematical impossibility, I would not put it past him. He needs to resist the urge to overthink the tactics in games like that. He needs to keep things simple and effective, and just unleash Reading, play everyone in their proper positions, and hopefully get a good result. But I'm not massively confident about that.
Your confidence in these two games, do you think that's been influenced by the Tuesday night performance of Bolton at all, or do you think that taking the Bolton result aside, you would still have a little bit of doubt about the Barnsley game still? Does the Bolton result actually really change how we're looking at these upcoming home games?
I think predominantly my lack of confidence has been influenced by everything that I've seen from Yapstam in over a year. I don't think a huge amount has changed between say last November and this November, to be honest. As I said earlier, the Bolton performance was just so reminiscent of what we've seen so many times before. I don't think there's been a huge amount of growth, and because of that I can see us struggling against Barnsley again. I seem to remember us drawing 0-0 at home against Barnsley last year, and they had some really good chances in that game, and in a sense we're a little bit lucky not to lose that game. Yeah.
Well, even though we had Lewis Graben at centre mid,
yeah.
I mean that's as tactical plans go.
Yeah, that was quite something. And again, that's representative of what Stam's like as a manager. He won't just play a really good striker as a striker in the system, in the style that player demands. Instead, he'll always try and overthink things. And I fear that things like that are going to do for Jaap Stam as a manager, whether it's here or somewhere else. I think he's always going to try and overthink things.
Yes, well, we'll have to see how that one gets on over the weekend at 3 p.m. on Saturday. Of course, we'll be hosting Sheffield Wednesday. Then on the Tuesday night, we'll finally get our chance to take on Barnsley, and we'll be back on the same amount of games played as everyone else in the division. Well, that's it then for episode 144 of the Tilehurst End. I only left to thank you very much, Simeon Pickup, for turning up and doing this over Skype. It's been a little bit of a technical funfair, let's call it, for the night's podcast. We'll hopefully be back on Wednesday after the Barnsley game with a new podcast for you. So thank you very much for turning up, Sim.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we will see you later. And 2 home games now, so it's a very simple equation. 2 home games, 2 wins. Come on, you Rs.
You smile, funny how the crimes always leave a trail, even when it's